Hi, it's Penny here. Welcome to a new reading vlog. This week, the main thing I'm going to be reading is Love and Pain by Ben Gillies and Chris Jono. So they are two of the members from the band Silverchair. The other member is Daniel Johns. So Silverchair was my most favourite band when I was 15. Probably, I wanted to say my first favourite band, but actually I love New Kids on the Block first, but can we count them as a band? Not really. So let's say my first favourite band, they're the same age as me, so all my friends basically had crushes on them. Somehow I got to have Daniel for myself and my other friends had crushes on Ben and Chris. I wish I was still in touch with those friends so I could ask their opinions of this book, because basically this is just Ben and Chris, and Daniel kind of went on to do more musical things. Ben still does some musical things too, but Daniel's had kind of the most success, and it sounds like as well they kind of had a bit of a blow up at the end of the band. So I'm kind of expecting their perspective of things not to be so forgiving of the past. I'm kind of expecting, to be honest, for it to be a lot of complaining. I think just because of the title, Love and Pain. But we will see. It might not be like that. I don't really know. I had a quick look inside and you can see it's like alternating between chapters of Ben and Chris. Also, I will note, it does say right at the beginning with Ellie Pascoe. So I suspect this is actually written by Ellie Pascoe and they've just told her their stories, but that's fine. That's how celebrity memoirs go. So I'm going to try and read about 60 pages of this a day and then I should be able to finish it by the end of the week, and I'll let you know as I go what we're learning about them. The other thing I did do is I dug out my Silverchair CDs so that I can listen to some of this music this week and like remind myself of my love of Silverchair. Will the songs still stand up? I don't know. I am still having a bit of a breakdown because I don't have all my CDs. So I've got, is there an order to this? I've got my Tomorrow EP. This is, I think, the first CD I ever bought. Me and my friend bought it with 5-cent pieces. So this was Silverchair's first single. Frog Stomp, though, their first album, I owned it. Where is it? I don't know. And I've recently, like, boxed up all my stuff and cleared out all my stuff in preparation for moving. So, like, there's not many places to look. And I just had one box of CDs and it's not in there. So I'm kind of hoping I'll find them this week. But otherwise, who knows? I've also got the single of Freak, but the album, Freak Show, where is it? Missing. I do also have Neon Ballroom and Diorama. I think around Diorama, like I don't think I ever listened to Diorama that much because they started getting less to my taste at that point. And like I've never really listened to much of Daniel's further stuff or Ben's further stuff just because, but then I was onto other emo stuff, you know? Anyway. This week is all going to be about Silverchair, but I do always need to have an audiobook on the go, so I will also be listening to One of Us is Back by Karen M. McManus. So I guess the way that I'm tying it into this Silverchair book is that this I expect to be a lot of teen angst with maybe kind of an adult perspective of teen angst. I'm also expecting One of Us is Back to have a fair amount of teen angst, so we will see by the end of this vlog whether I like these teenagers more or the teenagers in One of Us is Back more. Like real teenagers or fictional teenagers? Which ones are best? Okay, so yesterday I got about 50 pages into Love and Pain. And guys, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be mean. However, I think it's worse than I was expecting, and I wasn't really expecting it to be great. So firstly, the writing. The writing is not great. A lot of the sentences are very simple, and I actually looked up this Ellie Pascoe who's helped write it, and she's primarily written for like the Australian Woman Weekly and Marie Claire, which is like a teenage fashion magazine. And I'm not saying that magazine writers can't write well, but I do think magazine writers are often encouraged to use simple sentences because they're easy to read, and this reads very simple. Like as a 40-something-year-old woman reading this book, which is supposedly written by 40-year-old men, 40-something-year-old men, I don't get it. Like the writing just felt really juvenile and made me want to say like, how old are you guys? Why are you writing like this? And admittedly, these first chapters are mostly about their childhood and like the forming of the band and the forming of their friendships and like the initial competition they won that really like started things off for them. So like they're telling stories of when they're younger, so maybe when they get to like bits where they're a bit older, it will be less awful like that. maybe, but I guess like a few other things. I think the sun just went away. Anyway, there's a big section right at the beginning about how the rhythm section of the band is the ignored piece at the back, and it was tragic. The way it was written was just like, you guys need to get over yourselves. There are plenty of people that pay attention to the rhythm section of a band, and in fact, like as I was talking before, in high school, I like Daniel. The rest of my friends like Ben and Chris and paid attention to them. So you were not ignored. Why are you making out like you were? That was frustrating. Then there is also, like, in between the chapters by Ben and Chris talking about their childhood, there's kind of like little sections. They have these funny borders on them like this, which tells kind of like an event. It's kind of jumping around in time, so it's a little bit confusing. It's kind of like different big concerts that they've gone to, or like record labels trying to convince them to sign, or that kind of stuff. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, like they're just kind of like typical band stories, and it reminded me of how with Daisy Jones and the Six, I always said I don't really like that book. I find it boring because it's just like all my musician friends telling stories, and that's what some of the stories in this is like. Just boring, and like they're not even telling the stories very well as a lot of the stories being boring. Well, maybe that's not true. There were a few little sections that I found interesting. Actually, one bit I found interesting is there was another member in the band, and then he went away with his parents for this 1-year exchange, and it was while he was away that the band kind of started getting famous. And when he came back, they kicked him out of the band, or they said, no, we don't want you back in the band. And interestingly, it seemed like it was mainly Ben and Daniel that made that decision, but Chris was the one who was kind of forced into communicating that with him, which is kind of not very nice. So there were like things like that I find quite interesting. I think what I find most interesting in this book is just looking at how toxic these relationships are. There is another bit right at the beginning. So Ben's first chapter talks all about meeting Daniel and how much he cared about his friendship with Daniel, and then like a weird paragraph talking about how there was one point where Daniel went off and like dropped Ben, hung out with this guy called Scott, and then he dropped Scott and came back and hung out with Ben, and he's like, I didn't think about it much at the time, but later ... It's just so pathetic. Terrible. And there's also another bit where they describe this book as their legacy. And guys, you really need this to not be your legacy. This is not a good legacy. Maybe it will be, but it shouldn't be. Your legacy should be your music. It's terrible. So I'm going to continue this, but not having a great time. I will say, yesterday I did listen to Frog Stomp, and I really enjoyed it. It is a little bit hard, like even though like that album's 30 years old now, almost, and I probably haven't listened to it that much over the last 20 years, but prior to that, I listened to it so often that listening to it again just like took me back to those times, and I don't feel like I can objectively judge whether those songs are good or not, but I think for 15-year-old boys, pretty good. Definitely a much better legacy than this book. Okay, so I'm now just past page 100 on this. I meant to read a little bit more last night, but I got too tired, and maybe I still look tired now. Anyway, I have things to say about this. Firstly, there's a big bit in here about how they are serious musicians, not teen heartthrobs, and like praising their management for like positioning them as these real musicians rather than teen heartthrobs. And it really frustrates me. They're like, we're so glad we didn't do any interviews for those like teenage girl magazines, and we weren't interested in like the teenage girls that were all in love with us. And I really hate this false dichotomy that you have to be either a real artist or a teen heartthrob. The idea that your teenage girl fans aren't real fans, can't properly respect your music. Now, admittedly, yes, all me and my friends were in love with these boys, and we had our fanfics, our Silverchair fanfics, which at some point I'll tell you about my one, because while all my friends were writing contemporary romances, I was writing a sci-fi. But anyway, just the lack of respect for teenage girls, infuriating. And also, what's really dumb about this, they're like, oh, we're serious musicians. But then there's talk about how like they did this big interview and the main focus of it was around like them mooning people from their tour bus. Like, wow, you guys are like super serious musicians. Oh, I don't know what's happening with the lighting here. Anyway, it just really frustrates me that like the idea that a teenage girl likes you is very something people don't want. And then no one ever talks about like, oh, I hate it, only teenage boys like me. It's just, people are people. If they like what you're doing, why would you not respect that? Why would you not appreciate that? So, didn't like that part of the book. There was also a bit in here kind of about, I feel like I need to fix this lighting. This is probably not better. Maybe it is. The sun always comes through my side window in the afternoon. You don't care. So there's a big section in here as well talking about how the royalties work, and I can tell that this is going to be a sticking point for the band not getting along, because as Daniel is in most cases the main songwriter and has most of the songwriting credits, Daniel gets the most royalties. And there's a weird bit in here where it references this like research study that showed that bands that split their royalties evenly tend to be more successful. And it was really weird to have this reference to a scientific study in a book that still feels like it's written for children and like with a whole bunch of teenage boy type antics in it. And just like, honestly, it's like reading something written by a teenage boy. So like actually everything it said about royalties and referencing that study was fine, but it just felt really out of the blue. I will say though, there is a bunch of stuff in here about their record deals and their management that I did find quite interesting. There was also some talk about how their first tour, they were put in like a really shitty tour bus and not given like everything they could have afforded because their manager didn't want them to like get too much of a big ego and like wanted them to have a more realistic experience. And while I think that's true, I also think like they had their parents along with them, and so I kind of suspect it wasn't as bad as like some musicians go through really horrible experiences in order to make it or to not make it even. So I kind of think maybe just from the tone of this book, they may be more privileged than they realize. Anyway, I will definitely read more of this tonight. I will mention my audiobook that I was going to read. I don't know now if I'm going to get to it. Because I also haven't listened to any more of the albums, and I might actually, when I go for a run tomorrow, listen to some more of the albums instead of my audiobook. But I'll decide that tomorrow.
Pick it up from the top, hit restart. So far it's been so hard to live, but lately something in me changed. Let it go, let it be. Don't fight your way back in. Let me go, let me be. It's time that we begin.
So it's been a few days because we went on a little surprise overnight camping trip, which actually felt much longer than it was. But anyway, I have been reading this. I will say, this is really simple and fast to get through, and I've actually been holding myself back just so that I could get around to doing my vlog updates. Otherwise, I probably could have finished this while we were camping. So I guess I criticized it on its simple writing earlier, and I do think it's still not the best, but at least it makes it quick to get through, right? So I think I'm now about 2/3 of the way through. One thing I did want to mention is there is talk in here about how the New Zealand team dropped the ball on marketing for Freak Show, and that's why it didn't do so well. I have to say, I feel like there's a few spots in this book where they blame something not doing as well as they thought it would, on like random like reasons, and it always just feels like a bit of an excuse to me. Like maybe the song just wasn't as good as you thought it was, or maybe it just didn't connect with the audience for like no reason. Like music is not that simple. There's not always a reason. And also it's always like somebody else didn't do their job, never like, oh, we as the band didn't do our job. Anyway, they then say that the New Zealand marketing team did a much better job for Neon Ballroom, and I do remember like a big push around Neon Ballroom and there being like 1 million copies in the record shop, and I was really annoyed because the day before it was supposed to be released, they had them all in the shop and they wouldn't sell it to me because it wasn't supposed to be out yet, but also like, why do you have them all on the shelves? So I remember that, but I also remember that there was a concert around that time and I didn't hear about it until the day after it had happened, or I would have gone. So marketing may be a bit iffy as well. So most of the book has been about like tour antics and a lot of like pranks and really stupid juvenile behavior, and it does also get into, I guess, a little bit of hinting about their alcoholism. What I find interesting is the stuff about the alcoholism is written with a lot of perspective, like an older person's perspective, and you can see that they perhaps realize at this point that that behavior wasn't the best. But all the pranking and the really immature behavior, that isn't written with the same perspective where I would expect it to be. Also, all those stories are told like really drawn out. Like a whole chapter will be about a story that could be told in like a couple of lines, you know? And it's really difficult to read because it's so stupid. Like there's one bit where they're talking about they got this keyboard player and they kind of like hazed him when he joined the tour, and they're always throwing like wet wads of toilet paper at him and doing stupid shit like that. And they say something about like the manager told the keyboard player not to react because that would have caused them to escalate, and they're kind of just like, ho ho ho, yeah, it would have. And they don't say like, wow, maybe that was really idiotic. So then they also talk about kind of at the end of that tour, the tour for Freak, Daniel kind of starts drifting away and spending less time with them, and they kind of hear rumors that maybe he's considering leaving the band even though he never talks to them about it. And like, I can't really blame Daniel for not wanting to be around them when that kind of stupid shit is the normal behavior, and it just kind of feels normal to me that a group of teens when they're 15, and then when they get a little bit older, maybe some will be going in one direction, some will be going in another direction. Maybe you're not the same people anymore. So then, after the Freak tour, they basically take a year off, and as far as I can tell, don't talk to Daniel for a year. And then they come back. Daniel arranges this meeting at his house, and he's written this letter about how he wants to continue the band, but only if he can have complete creative control on the third album? The fourth album. Oh, I feel like I'm confused now. Actually, I think all of this is happening at the end of Neon Ballroom. So what I find interesting is they're really complaining like that Daniel didn't even read the letter himself. They got the manager to read it, and they feel like, you know, why couldn't their friend even look them in the eye when he was telling them this message? And I was like, I don't think you guys realize that you haven't been friends probably for years. Like, if you haven't talked to him for the last year, you definitely haven't been friends for the last year. But it sounds like you weren't really even friends at the end of the last concert. What I would really like to see, actually, is the perspective. Like, I'd love to get the story told from the perspective of their manager, because I suspect that he had a much better idea of what was going on with everyone. And it kind of just seems like Ben and Chris were probably quite oblivious of everything that was going on. There is also another bit, I think when they came back to record Neon Ballroom, and Daniel referred to having been working on some songs for the third album, and Ben was like, it was the first time I'd ever heard making music referred to as work. And I just, again, feel like that shows they're quite oblivious in terms of the amount of effort that might go into songwriting. And you might think I'm siding with Daniel because I had a crush on Daniel, but actually I think it's more because I have been the guitarist and singer in a band that I'm siding more with him. And just because all the stupid hijinks, I have no patience for it. Anyway, I have also listened to both Freak and Neon Ballroom now, and what I find interesting is I didn't really like Freak that much. Like, it's fine, and it is more similar to Frog Stomp, but I think Frog Stomp and Neon Ballroom are probably my favorites. But also, listening to Freak, at the time, I think I assumed that a lot of the songs were about like some kind of relationship that Daniel had, but listening to it just after having read this, I can't help but wonder if some of the songs are about the band. So I guess I'm up to a bit where they'll probably explain what happens around diorama time, and I will also listen to diorama, and then I will check back in. Okay, so I have finished Love and Pain. How do I feel about it? I don't know. Firstly, I feel like it's crazy. They spent $800,000 on diorama and like $1 million on Young Modern, I think. To be honest, what I realized is I did try to listen to Diorama and Young Modern. I didn't make it through Diorama, and I only listened to a little bit of Young Modern. They really did go off in a direction that wasn't to my taste. I'm like an angry guitar girl, and the first albums were more like that. I really liked Neon Ballroom. I thought even though that went more melodic and beautiful, I still like it fitted my taste. But after that, they went in a different direction, and that is the direction Daniel went in. In my opinion, at that point, the band probably should have broken up. Like, after the third album, break up, Ben can go off and do something else. He probably should have gone and done like a Dave Grohl, written his own songs, found his own fame, instead of always being so obsessed with this thing that they had when they were young. Chris could have just gone off and done his hotel stuff, his restaurant stuff like he wanted to do, and Daniel could have gone off and been what he really wanted to be without feeling like these other guys were holding him back or whatever he felt. Who knows, because we're just guessing at Daniel's perspective in this. As I said, I still think the manager's perspective would be the most interesting, and these guys, not so much. Like, I think the things that interested me the most in this book were the stuff about how they were creating their records and just the progression of their career. Even the relationship stuff between them was kind of like watching a train wreck, like interesting, but like not the same kind of interesting, not like the interesting I want to read, just more like the kind of interesting you can't stop reading. But I also think there's a lot in here that I would have liked to have known about that these guys can't tell me about because they don't really know about it. I can see that throughout it they were really trying to give a balanced view, and even Ben, who was clearly very bitter about what's gone on with Daniel, even he was trying to be balanced even though he really wasn't. But I think as well, like, they're so bitter about the way that Daniel ended things, even though I don't know that they've fully taken responsibility for their own part in it, or especially Ben, but I think they wish they'd done like a farewell tour or had some kind of closure. I think people always want closure, and it's never what they think it would be. Like, it doesn't really make them feel that much better. Also, actually, the thing that I keep thinking about with this book, right at the end, Chris talks about how he had a heart attack and he felt like he might be having a heart attack, so he got in his car and drove to the hospital. Please don't drive if you're having a heart attack. That's crazy. Also, just the stuff at the end about their families and stuff, less interested in that. Yeah, I think I got something out of this book. I found it really interesting. I probably have a lot less respect for these guys than I did before, although I think I have more respect for Chris than I do for Ben. Although that heart attack thing, maybe not. But I also think, like, this is such a limited perspective of the story that it doesn't really give you everything you would want. As well, the writing is terrible. It spends so much time on all those like immature, juvenile, delinquent bullshit that is really boring. Like, just so many mundane stories in this, told in a really boring and stretched out way. If you are a fan of Silverchair, you probably still will get something out of this, but it could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot better. Anyway, let me know if you've read this, what you thought about it, or let me know if you even know of Silverchair. Were you a fan of them? Have you ever read a celebrity memoir and it's changed your opinion of the celebrity for the worse? As well, do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.